There are many ballet schools in the world, but for a long time the most prestigious ones were the French, Russian, and American. Until the late 80s, no one could have imagined that a new player would break into this elite circle. But change is inevitable. In 1988, the Belgian ballet school, sometimes referred to as the Flemish school, made its mark thanks to one single person, Francois van Varenberg. Today, we remember his meteoric rise on the American stage and the challenging twilight of his career in the late 90s. Unlike most stars, Jean-Claude Van Damme built his own destiny. After moving to the United States in the early 80s, he started from the very bottom. He had to earn a living with odd jobs, delivering pizza, working as a martial arts coach. Van Damme devoted all his free time to auditions, and after one of them he landed a role in the short film Monaco Forever, even though that film received negative reviews and nearly derailed his career. Van Damme's first on-screen appearance took place way back in 1979 in the Belgian film Woman Between Dog and Wolf, which featured a shining Rutger Hauer. However, no one noticed the young actor there, just as they failed to take notice in Monaco Forever. What ultimately saved him was his encounter with Chuck Norris, who offered Van Damme a stuntman role in Missing in Action, 1984. Although he is barely visible in the film, this experience would later open the doors to Hollywood. Later on, Van Damme tried his hand in the science fiction film Predator, about which many rumors regarding his involvement have circulated. According to some accounts, he signed a contract without scrutinizing its terms, not realizing that his face would never appear on screen. Yet even these early setbacks did not break his spirit. He soon proved that he was worthy of being an action star. There are several theories as to why Van Damme left Predator. Some claim that he behaved too aggressively on set, trying to demonstrate his famous Belgian strike-off script. Jesse Ventura even asserts that this was the reason for his dismissal. Another theory holds that Van Damme simply looked ridiculous next to Arnold Schwarzenegger. His short stature was acceptable for the original flawed design of Predator, but once the monster was redesigned, he appeared too diminutive for the role. Despite his dismissal, several shots featuring Van Damme remained in the film. It is said that he is the one seen running through the jungle from a frightened soldier. However, a real opportunity to showcase his talent on the American screen came a year later, in 1986, when the Belgian played the antagonist in the action film No Retreat, No Surrender. The film became a cult classic in the era of video rental stores, and Van Damme portrayed a Russian fighter named Ivan on screen. This role proved to be decisive for him. He understood that his success depended on how noticeable he was. The entire film was shot under conditions of constant script revisions, forcing the actors to improvise on the fly. Van Damme broke records in this regard. For $250 a day, he gave his absolute best. If the script called for one hit, he delivered 4. If 2 were required, he executed 10. Timothy Baker and Peter Cunningham experienced his enthusiasm firsthand. Van Damme beat Cunningham in the ring until the latter lost consciousness, and twice a day he left the set numb. As for Baker, instead of receiving just one blow, he endured several dozen. Baker did not forget this even years later. When the now famous Van Damme ended up in court for injuring actor Jackson Pinckney during the filming of Cyborg, Baker appeared to testify as a witness to the Belgian's toughness. At the trial, Timothy Baker stated that Van Damme showed a blatant disregard for the safety of his colleagues by continuing to hit him despite the shouts of director Cary Uenia on the set of No Retreat, No Surrender. In those years, the Belgian was struggling to make ends meet. Even his old Trabant wouldn't start without the help of crew members who had to push the car. The film wasn't a major hit, but it did earn enough to justify its modest budget. More importantly, it helped Van Damme move one step closer to a breakthrough: his participation in Bloodsport. With that project, he literally camped outside the doors of Cannon Group, trying to convince the producers to give him a chance. In 1986, the outlook wasn't promising, but fate turned in his favor when he was offered a script that had been gathering dust in the studio archives for several years. This project, with a budget of $1.5 million, proved problematic even at the production stage, and the test screenings were a complete failure. Cannon Group even refused to release the film in theaters, but this setback ultimately gave Van Damme the opportunity to appear in Black Eagle, where he once again portrayed a Russian villain, Andrusha. At that time, no one had heard of Bloodsport, and Van Damme had to sign a contract with Imperial Entertainment for 2 films in which he would play less prominent roles. Although his name still didn't shine on billboards, some scenes in Black Eagle were rewritten just before shooting began to accommodate Van Damme's involvement. True to form, nothing could hold the actor back. He immediately began engaging in impromptu sparring sessions with everyone nearby. Even the main character, Sho Kosugi, wasn't spared. It is said that Kosugi initially endured precise blows to the face, but eventually lost his patience and fought back against Van Damme, prompting someone to intervene to break up the fight. Van Damme's final fight was supposed to end with a defeat at the hands of Kosugi, but he refused to accept that outcome. As a result, the ending was changed. His character died beneath the boat's propeller. This moment made Van Damme wonder, if he didn't take the next step, his career might end just as abruptly. In an effort to save his career, Van Damme decided to try his hand at editing. He convinced the head of Cannon Group to give him all the footage from Bloodsport so that he could assemble a proper film. His version pleased the producers, and in 1988, 2 years after filming, the movie finally hit theaters. Interestingly, Black Eagle never made it to theaters, which may have actually worked to the Belgians' advantage. Bloodsport became a sensation. In the USA, it grossed $12 million, an additional $18 million were earned in worldwide box office, and in France, the film was seen by 1 million viewers. It seemed that his career was finally on the rise, but then came Cyborg, which nearly ruined everything. The script for Cyborg was assembled by director Albert Pyun from 2 Cannon Group projects, a sequel to the failed Masters of the Universe with Dolph Lundgren, and an adaptation of Marvel's Spider-Man comics. The studio needed to recoup the $1.5 million it had spent, so all the accumulated footage, costumes, and sets found a new purpose in Cyborg, which ended up costing only $500,000. Due to a series of setbacks, Cannon Group shot the film in a rush, employing the same actors in multiple roles. This led to disastrous test screenings. Only 1 out of 100 viewers gave it a positive rating. The producers were on the verge of rushing the film's release to recover their investment, but Van Damme intervened once again and persuaded them to give him time for a new edit. It was during this period that a scandalous lawsuit took place. Van Damme accidentally struck Jackson Pinckney in the eye with a sword, which became the cause of a legal claim. Van Damme had to pay the actor the required sum. The exact figure remains undisclosed. Even though the film performed reasonably well at the box office, it failed to replicate the success of Bloodsport. Despite a budget of $2 million, it only managed to gross $10 million in the USA, and its international earnings were modest. Following Cyborg came Kickboxer, which became a genuine global hit. The film, produced for $1.5 million, grossed over $40 million worldwide, $15 million of which came solely from the American market. French audiences once again packed theaters, and German cinephiles were equally enthusiastic about its success. After the triumph of Kickboxer, Van Damme embarked on his final project for Cannon, the film Death Warrant. Its relatively modest recognition is likely due to the fact that it was shot by a defunct studio, the very studio that had served as his lifeline through Bloodsport. Meanwhile, although his films were profitable, larger-scale studio projects such as Over the Top with Stallone ended up failing spectacularly. Interestingly, according to Van Damme himself, he literally wrested the role in Death Warrant away from Steven Seagal. There were rumors that they quarreled over mutual barbs in interviews. Van Damme even suspected that Seagal's sudden transformation was an attempt to hide from the Mafia. However, the conflict truly erupted because of Death Warrant. As the filming was nearing its end, Cannon Group went bankrupt, and by that point the Belgian was no longer troubled by it. He moved on to Lionheart since Cannon's assets were being transferred to MGM, and Death Warrant remained shelved for over a year. Lionheart became an impromptu project for Van Damme, one into which he was forced to perform as part of a contract with Imperial Entertainment for 2 films. Van Damme had to take everything into his own hands to meet his contractual obligations. He came up with the idea for Lionheart himself and actively participated in writing the script. His creativity shone through in ideas such as a Scottish kilt for one of the fighters, a white cat for the character Attila as a tribute to James Bond, and a fight that culminated in one stunning blow. Not without its quirky moments, Van Damme himself insisted on a scene where his bare backside was shown. In terms of box office receipts, Lionheart ended up being the Belgians' most successful film. In the American theatrical release, the film grossed $24 million on a record-breaking budget for Van Damme of $6 million. The exact global totals remain unclear, but the numbers of viewers in France and Germany set new records for him. While Lionheart was conquering theaters, MGM's death warrant virtually vanished from screens. In some versions of the film, the opening sequence began with the logo of the now-defunct studio Cannon Films. Nevertheless, MGM eventually made adjustments by replacing the studio. Interestingly, even a film released 2 years after production, with minimal advertising and nearly forgotten, managed to earn $16 million in the US on a $4 million budget. How much MGM ultimately raked in from video sales remains a mystery. Meanwhile, Van Damme himself, as if launching into space, continued to gain momentum. His next project, Double Impact, once again broke box office records. The Belgian enthusiastically fulfilled his dream of playing two twins, proving his ability to drastically transform his on-screen personas. Not everyone appreciated the potential of this concept. Director Albert Pyun, known for Cyborg, recalls how, in the late 80s, Van Damme proposed a joint project called Corsican Brother, a story about two twin brothers. Pyun dismissed the idea as absurd, advising Van Damme not to trouble himself with such nonsense and, in general, to avoid excesses like frequent drinking. According to him, after that conversation, the two never crossed paths again. In the US, Double Impact grossed $30 million, with almost 2 million viewers in France and 1.5 million in Germany, suggesting that combined collections might have reached as high as $70 million. By the early 90s, Van Damme had reached superstar status. Every new film brought in more money, his fees kept climbing along with his sense of self-importance, and at the same time, his addictions to prohibited substances were on the rise. In 1993, during the filming of Nowhere to Run, Van Damme nearly lost control. Originally, the project was conceived very differently. The script, penned by Joe Esterhaas and Richard Marquand, was intended as a romantic story about an escaped convict and a widow with 2 children. In its earlier incarnation, under the influence of Mark Wind, the mastermind behind the ambitious project Star Wars: Return of the Jedi, the script did not call for dynamic brawls or genuine action scenes. The leading role was slated for Mel Gibson, but after Wind's tragic death in 1987, the project stalled. Despite criticism from influential figures like Bill Gates, who openly expressed his dissatisfaction with the original version, Van Damme held his ground and earned $2.5 million for his role in Nowhere to Run. Although the film was his second in terms of budget after Universal Soldier, and his highest-paid project at that point, it turned out to be commercially weaker than his previous works in the American market. However, thanks to the support of local audiences, the film eventually broke even, and 1994 turned out to be a record year with total box office revenues exceeding $100 million. Soon after, another highly publicized project, Street Fighter, was in the works, a film that was meant to cement his status in the American film market. Although the film did not flop at the box office, scandalous reviews from audiences and the Belgians' eccentric behavior on set hinted at more challenging times ahead. His next venture was a movie with the provocative title Sudden Death, for which Van Damme received a generous fee of $5 million. However, this film ended up being his first theatrical box office failure in traditional markets. The initial versions of the script for Sudden Death were first offered to Arnold Schwarzenegger, then to Sylvester Stallone, and finally to Bruce Willis. All of them declined for various reasons. Ultimately, Van Damme joined the project, which led to a significant reduction in the budget and a large-scale overhaul of the material. According to Randy Feldman, the author of the initial version, his parodic script practically lost its essence. The only scene that survived was the fight with the hockey club's mascot. The film grossed $64 million against a budget of $35 million, so it only managed to turn a profit with its video release. Failures quickly followed. Even the sequel, whose script was ready by the time Sudden Death was released, was promptly canceled by the studio. In an attempt to salvage his career, Van Damme took matters into his own hands. Under a contract with Universal, he released the film The Quest, in which he also tried his hand at directing. However, this project, like his attempts to revive the success of Bloodsport, failed to regain its previous momentum. The studio eventually terminated its contract with him. At the same time, the Belgian superstar also turned down a role as the antagonist in Warner's ambitious action film Sandy Storm, in which Wesley Snipes was supposed to appear, and the project remained nothing more than a rumor. From that point on, Van Damme's situation worsened. His films gradually vanished from U.S. theaters and the budgets of his projects dropped sharply. Certain films, for instance Legionnaire and Inferno, Desert Heat directed by Rocky John Avildsen, were swiftly removed from release schedules, and the big-budget sequel to Universal's Soldier ultimately marked the end of his theatrical era. In Europe, some low-grossing releases still managed to make it to the big screens, but by the mid-2000s, Van Damme had almost entirely transitioned to the video format. A modest success did come with the crime comedy JCVD, which was widely released in France, although it did not fully rescue him from a prolonged crisis. After 2010, Van Damme periodically tried to reclaim his reputation, assisted by the support of Sylvester Stallone, but further attempts to firmly establish himself on the small screen proved fruitless. Today, the actor opts for projects with provocative titles and mixed reviews, appearing rather infrequently. Perhaps this is the best strategy, considering that changes in his persona and his battle with addictions began too late. Perhaps if American studios had given him a chance after his initial failures, his fate might have turned out differently. On this note, we wrap up the story of Jean-Claude Van Damme, a man who forged his own destiny, even though it wasn't always an easy path. I put a lot of heart and effort into creating this content, so if you appreciate this type of material, leave a comment, subscribe, and let me know what you think. Thanks for sticking with me until the end. See you in the next episode.